Why does it feel like people always take advantage of you, and why can't you seem to stop it? The answer isn't just in others, it's inside you. There's a silent force guiding your reactions, one you're not even aware of. In this video, we'll reveal how Carl Jung's theory of the shadow holds the secret to breaking free from manipulation and reclaiming your energy. The truth is, once you master this, no one can control you again. But first, do you have the courage to face your own darkness? Let's get honest about something most people never want to admit. The feeling that everyone uses you doesn't come out of nowhere. It isn't just a string of bad luck or the fault of every demanding friend, partner, or boss. There's a deeper reason you keep ending up in situations where you feel drained, unappreciated, or like a doormat. The truth is, these patterns don't just happen to you, they happen through you. Think about how often you agree to things you don't want to do. Maybe you say yes to extra work, cancel your own plans, or lend money you can't spare, all to avoid the discomfort of saying no. You tell yourself you're just being helpful, but underneath, there's a simmering resentment. You notice when others don't return the favor, and you wonder why you're always the one left depleted. This isn't a random flaw, it's a learned pattern, and it's driven by something inside you that's been quietly running the show. Carl Jung called this hidden force the shadow. Jung defined the shadow as the sum of the traits, emotions, and impulses you repress because you, or the world around you, deem them unacceptable. The shadow isn't evil by nature, it's simply hidden, and that's what gives it so much power. It's the part of you that wants approval more than boundaries, that hides fear behind friendliness, or that chooses silence to avoid conflict. Every time you say yes when you want to say no, you're not just being nice, you're letting your shadow steer your choices. Sometimes the shadow shows up not in what you say, but in what you don't. Picture a moment when someone clearly crosses your line. Maybe it's a partner making a hurtful comment, a friend who takes you for granted, or a colleague who dumps extra work on your desk. You feel the urge to speak up, but instead, you swallow your words. You convince yourself it's not worth the confrontation, or you'll just let it slide. But deep down, what's really at play is a fear of rejection or disapproval, a fear so strong that silence feels safer than honesty. Each time you stay quiet, you reinforce the idea that your boundaries don't matter, and you give others silent permission to keep pushing. And then there's the habit of over-apologizing. You say sorry for things that aren't your fault, or for simply existing in someone's space. Sorry I didn't get back to you. Sorry if I bothered you. Each needless sorry chips away at your self-worth and trains others to see you as someone who will always shrink. Over time, these apologies become automatic, a reflex born from a deep need for approval and a fear of upsetting anyone. The more you apologize for simply being yourself, the more you teach people to expect less from you and to give less in return. All these behaviors, people-pleasing, silence in the face of disrespect, and compulsive apologizing, feel like ways to protect yourself. They seem to keep the peace, avoid conflict, and maintain relationships. But the reality is, they come at a steep cost. You end up feeling resentful, invisible, and powerless. You wonder why no one respects your limits, but you're the one erasing them day after day. It's tempting to blame the world, but the uncomfortable truth is that these patterns are rooted in your own shadow, the part of yourself you refuse to acknowledge, the part that keeps you locked in cycles of self-betrayal. Jung's insight was that the shadow isn't just a collection of flaws, it's everything you've pushed out of sight because you were told it was wrong, weak, or shameful. The shadow hides behind your best intentions. It wears the mask of kindness, patience, or humility, all while sabotaging your real needs. The people-pleaser isn't acting out of pure generosity. They're trying to control how others see them, to avoid conflict, to keep rejection at bay. There's a difference between true kindness and self-erasure, and the shadow blurs that line until you can't see it anymore. Here's another hard truth. When you avoid conflict, when you apologize for existing, when you hesitate to draw a line, you're sending signals, loud and clear. Manipulators don't need you to spell out your vulnerabilities. They watch for hesitation, for the places where you won't push back. Emotional reactivity makes you predictable, and the more predictable you are, the easier it is for others to take advantage. The world reads your boundaries, or lack thereof, and responds in kind. You can't outsmart the shadow by pretending it isn't there. The more you ignore it, the more it shapes your life without your consent. But the moment you start to recognize its patterns, something shifts. You begin to see how your own hidden fears and needs have been quietly opening the door to manipulation. The focus moves from blaming others to understanding the ways you've been complicit in your own exhaustion. This is the point where real change becomes possible. Recognizing the shadow's influence is the first step, but it leads to a bigger question. What is this hidden part of you really doing, and why does it have so much control over your reactions? There's a force inside you that doesn't announce itself, doesn't ask for permission, and yet it shapes nearly every choice you make. This force is what Carl Jung called the shadow, the hidden side of your personality that operates beneath your awareness. It isn't some dramatic villain plotting your downfall. It works quietly, guiding your reactions, steering you away from confrontation, and convincing you that safety lies in silence or compliance. Most people never realize how much control this shadow has over their lives. The shadow forms early, usually in childhood, as you learn which traits, feelings, or impulses are acceptable and which are not. Maybe you were told not to get angry, that wanting things for yourself was selfish, or that disagreeing made you difficult. So you buried those parts of yourself, thinking you could just leave them behind. But what's hidden isn't erased. Those rejected traits, anger, assertiveness, the urge to say no, don't disappear. They slip out of sight and begin to influence you from the background. This is why you find yourself stuck in the same kinds of situations, again and again. As Jung observed, unconscious forces often repeat patterns to preserve the status quo. You might notice you're always the one who picks up the slack, always the one who stays quiet during disagreements, always the one who feels invisible in relationships. The shadow scripts these moments, not because it wants you to suffer, but because it's trying to protect you from what it fears most: rejection, abandonment, or the pain of being seen as too much. And since these fears operate beneath your conscious awareness, you mistake your reactions for free choices. Look at how this plays out in everyday life. Someone asks you for a favor you don't want to do. You feel the urge to say no, but instead you hear yourself say yes. You justify it as being helpful, but underneath, it's the shadow's fear of disapproval calling the shots. Or maybe you're in a conversation where someone crosses a line. You want to speak up, but a wave of anxiety stops you. The shadow whispers that conflict isn't worth the risk, that keeping the peace is safer, even if it means betraying your own needs. The shadow's influence is subtle but relentless. It tells you that setting boundaries is dangerous, that your needs don't matter as much as others, and that blending in is better than standing out. It's not just about avoiding conflict, it's about avoiding the possibility of being excluded, dismissed, or unloved. The primitive mind equates exclusion with a threat to survival, so the shadow will do whatever it takes to keep you in the tribe, even if it means sacrificing your authenticity. Jung's theory makes it clear: the shadow acts unconsciously, shaping your decisions and reactions before you're even aware of what's happening. That's why you walk away from situations feeling powerless, frustrated, or resentful. It isn't that you lack willpower or self-respect. It's that the shadow's influence is so automatic, you don't even see it working. You think you're choosing to stay quiet, to help, to apologize. But in reality, you're acting out an old script written by the parts of yourself you've tried to hide. Here's the uncomfortable truth. As long as you remain unaware of the shadow, it will keep running your life. You'll keep repeating the same patterns, feeling the same disappointments, and wondering why nothing changes. The shadow isn't evil, but ignorance gives it power. It's a misguided protector, clinging to outdated strategies that may have kept you safe as a child, but now hold you back as an adult. Understanding the shadow is step one, but as Jung warned, ignorance only makes it more powerful. The next step is integration. This means recognizing the shadow's patterns, seeing how they show up in your life, and accepting them as part of who you are. Integration isn't about fighting or suppressing these hidden parts. It's about bringing them into the light so you can choose your actions consciously instead of reacting out of fear. When you start to see the shadow clearly, you take back control. You stop letting old fears dictate your boundaries, your voice, your choices. You become less reactive and more intentional. This shift doesn't make you cold or unfeeling. In fact, it's the foundation of real emotional strength. You gain the ability to respond instead of react, to hold your ground without guilt, and to protect your energy without apology. Most people never reach this point. They stay trapped in cycles of self-betrayal, always wondering why others seem to have the upper hand. But when you begin to integrate your shadow, you discover a new kind of power, a calm, steady presence that can't be manipulated. And once you experience this, you'll wonder how you ever lived any other way. But what does it actually look like to move from reactivity to this kind of strength? How do you go from being at the mercy of your shadow to having the kind of emotional solidity that makes you unshakable? Let's look at what happens when you finally stop letting others dictate your reactions. Emotional steadiness isn't a fantasy or a trick of personality. It's the result of cultivating what Jung called cold power. This isn't about shutting down or becoming numb. As one source puts it, cold power is not absence of emotion. It is mastery of someone who has traveled through the hell of their unconscious. It's emotional clarity, not emotional absence. This isn't a gimmick. It's a skill anyone can build. Cold power is the ability to meet even the most provocative situation with composure, to choose your response based on your values instead of your fears, and to hold your ground without apology or explanation. Look at your own life. How many times have you agreed to something you didn't want just to avoid discomfort? How often have you snapped back in anger or retreated into silence only to regret it later? These are the moments where reactivity takes over, where old scripts and hidden fears run the show. You might think you're making a choice, but if you're honest, it's often just a reflex. That's the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is automatic. Responding is deliberate. Cold power doesn't demand that you erase your emotions or pretend you don't feel hurt, anxious, or angry. In fact, it requires that you feel those emotions fully, observe them, name them, and understand what they're trying to protect. The mastery comes in the space between the feeling and your action. You can notice the urge to please, the spike of guilt, the flash of resentment, and still choose a response that serves your integrity. This is the kind of self-mastery Jung described, integrating the shadow so thoroughly that your unconscious fears lose their grip. Let's make this real. Imagine someone asks you for a favor, a request you know will drain your time or energy. Maybe their tone is laced with expectation. Maybe they hint that saying no would make you selfish. In the past, you'd have felt a surge of guilt and rushed to say yes. But with cold power, you pause. You recognize the guilt as a shadow-driven reflex, not a mandate. You say, simply and calmly, "I can't help with that right now." No justification, no apology, just a clear boundary. As Jung taught, each reactive moment drains psychic energy. Choosing response over reaction preserves your inner strength. That's what it means to protect your energy as a divine resource, refusing to let others siphon it away through guilt or manipulation. This is the essence of shadow integration. When you accept the parts of yourself you once rejected, the need for approval, the fear of conflict, the longing to be liked, you strip them of their secret power. You see them for what they are, old strategies that kept you safe, but now keep you stuck. When you stop needing validation from others, you stop being reactive. You become someone whole, and as Jung pointed out, someone whole cannot be used. Wholeness means you no longer bend yourself out of shape to fit someone else's expectations. You respond on your terms, from a place of self-respect. People notice this shift. The ones who used to rely on your automatic yes, your emotional availability, your predictable reactions, they start to realize those days are over. They might test your boundaries, try to provoke you, or use the same old guilt trips. But you don't bite. You meet their attempts with calm, sometimes with silence. You give them nothing to latch onto, nothing to manipulate. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. You're not building walls, you're refusing to be moved by the winds of someone else's demands. But don't mistake this for easy. When you stop reacting, the world around you doesn't always celebrate your growth. Some people will respect your new boundaries, but others will push back, frustrated by the loss of control. You might feel their disappointment, anger, or confusion. You might even feel isolated at first, as if you're letting people down. This is the real test of cold power, holding steady even when others want the old, compliant version of you back. It's a practice, not a one-time act. You have to keep choosing your own well-being over the comfort of others' approval. True strength isn't about shutting people out or becoming rigid. It's about being open but unshakable. You can care for others, listen, and connect, but you don't give away your energy just because someone demands it. You learn to say no without guilt, to protect your boundaries without apology, and to reserve your energy for what truly matters. This is how you move from being manipulated to being respected, from being reactive to being intentional. And as you begin to reserve your energy and stop being so readily available, everything around you starts to shift. The balance of your relationships, the expectations others place on you, even your own sense of identity, all of it changes. Some people will adapt, some will drift away, and some will push harder than ever. The world responds in ways you might not expect. When you finally stop being available on demand, you're not just changing your schedule, you're changing the entire script of your relationships. The people around you, often without realizing it, have grown used to your predictability. Your immediate responses, your willingness to drop everything, your habit of smoothing over every rough edge. These things made you easy to read, easy to use, and easy to keep in a box. The moment you step back, the familiar roles start to break down. Suddenly, you're not the emotional emergency button, not the default problem solver, not the silent supporter. You become something unfamiliar, a person with boundaries. Let's look at the friend who always comes to you with their crises, expecting you to listen, advise, and absorb their stress, but who vanishes when you need support. What happens when you stop answering every late-night text, or you pause before picking up the phone? Maybe they make a snide comment about how you've changed. Maybe they stop reaching out altogether. You might feel a pang of guilt or even question whether you're being a bad friend. But take a closer look. That friendship wasn't built on mutual care. It was built on your availability to serve someone else's needs. When you withdraw, you force the other person to confront the reality that they weren't relating to your authentic self, but to the role you played for their convenience. And this dynamic doesn't just play out in friendships, it happens at work, at home, in every relationship where your predictability has been someone else's safety net. Jung said, "What you resist persists." But here, resistance is not avoidance, it's conscious withdrawal. When you stop reacting, explaining, or being instantly accessible, you disrupt the projections others have placed on you. The people who relied on your emotional labor are left with a void they can't easily fill. They may panic, become passive-aggressive, or accuse you of being selfish, but what's really happening is that you've broken the cycle of their dependence. Your silence, your pause, your refusal to be drawn in all send a signal. You're not theirs to control. This shift isn't just hard for others, it's hard for you. There's a lifetime of conditioning to unravel. Society teaches you, from childhood, that your worth is tied to being available, helpful, agreeable. You were told that kindness means never saying no, that love means self-sacrifice, and that being wanted is the same as being needed. But always being available is not a virtue. It's a form of self-imprisonment. The more accessible you are, the more predictable you become, and the more likely it is that people will use you as a means to their own ends. They come to expect your attention, your validation, your time, and when you stop delivering, they reveal how transactional the relationship always was. As you start pulling back, you'll notice the reactions. Some people will stop asking for favors when you begin saying no. Others might push harder, trying to guilt or shame you back into your old patterns. You may be called selfish, cold, or disloyal. The discomfort is real, but every time you choose your peace over their comfort, you reclaim a piece of the power you've been giving away your whole life. This is what the research calls conscious unavailability, reclaiming your energy, your time, and your peace. It starts with small acts, not responding immediately, pausing before reacting, saying no without guilt, and refusing to justify your absence. You don't owe explanations for protecting your own boundaries. Your energy is a finite resource. Every unnecessary argument, every moment spent defending yourself to someone who isn't listening, every commitment accepted out of guilt, these things drain your life force. Jung understood that individuation means learning to guard your energy as something sacred. If you don't protect it, others will use it up without a second thought. Practical steps like turning off your phone, walking away from pointless conversations, or declining draining invitations aren't acts of hostility. They're acts of self-preservation. Stepping back will unsettle people, and that's a good sign. It means you're reclaiming your power. Not every relationship will survive this shift. People who thrived on your constant availability may drift away, while others may push back even harder. This isn't failure, it's evidence that you're breaking the old patterns. What remains are the relationships that can adapt, that are built on respect and authenticity rather than expectation and convenience. But as the dust settles, you'll have to face something most people never prepare for: the silence that follows. When you stop living for others' demands, you're left with yourself, and that can be unsettling. The comfort of old roles, even if they were draining, gave you a sense of belonging. Now, you stand at the edge of something unfamiliar. The world feels quieter, emptier, sometimes lonelier. And this is where the real work begins, because freedom isn't just about breaking chains. It's about learning to live with what remains once they're gone. The hidden cost of freedom is radical responsibility. No more blaming others or circumstances. When you step into true autonomy, you lose the comfort of pointing the finger elsewhere. Every reaction, every disappointment, every moment of discomfort is yours to own. This isn't the kind of freedom that feels light and effortless. It's the kind that strips away your defenses and leaves you standing in the full glare of your own choices. The process Jung called individuation demands this level of honesty. You're not just breaking habits or cutting ties, you're dismantling the entire scaffolding of excuses and external validation that used to prop you up. Freedom isn't just about walking away from toxic patterns or manipulative relationships. It's about giving up the routines and roles that made life predictable, even if they left you empty. You stop playing the part others expect, and suddenly the ground shifts. People who once relied on your compliance may react with confusion, anger, or even accusations. You become the one who's changed, the one who no longer fits inside their expectations. What you're really doing is refusing to serve someone else's emotional agenda. And as you pull back, you see how much of your old life was built on being needed, not truly known. This shift brings a silence that's hard to describe until you've lived it. You might find yourself in a quiet room, the phone no longer buzzing with requests or complaints, and wonder if you've made a mistake. The absence of drama, the lack of constant demands, can feel unsettling at first. There's no one left to distract you from yourself. Jung called this sacred isolation, a necessary confrontation with the parts of yourself you've long avoided. It's not a punishment, and it's not depression. It's the space where you finally see what's been lurking under the surface, your fears, your longings, your real priorities. You may notice the loss most in the small, everyday moments. The friend who stops calling when you stop fixing their problems. The family member who grows distant when you stop saying yes to every request. The workplace that feels colder once you stop shouldering everyone else's burdens. These losses aren't always dramatic exits. Sometimes it's just a slow fading away. A quiet realization that some relationships only existed because you were willing to play a certain role. When you step out of that role, the relationship dissolves. The hidden cost is that you can't count on the old sources of comfort, validation, or even distraction. You have to find new ways to ground yourself. And then there's the void that opens up when you stop living for others' approval. The patterns that once defined your worth, being needed, being agreeable, being available, suddenly don't matter. You're no longer chasing recognition or waiting for permission to feel important. It can feel like standing on the edge of an empty field with no one to cheer you on and no one to blame if things go wrong. This is where the responsibility becomes real. You have to make peace with the silence, with the discomfort, with the uncertainty of not knowing who you'll be without the old roles. You start noticing how much you use dependent relationships to avoid facing your own emptiness. Now, there's nowhere to hide. But here's what most people miss. This stage, as uncomfortable as it is not a dead end. It's a rite of passage. The solitude you experience isn't about being cut off from the world. It's about creating the space to discover who you actually are. This is the point where you begin to see your raw, unfiltered self. The mask drops, the persona fades, and what remains is something honest, even if it's still unfinished. The power in this sacred isolation is that it forces you to accept every part of yourself, not just the parts that others liked or depended on. You'll also notice that as you shed old excuses, you gain clarity. The stories you used to tell about why you couldn't change, why you were stuck, or why you had to tolerate certain people, they all fall away. What's left is the burden and the gift of full responsibility. It's heavy at first. You're accountable for your own happiness, your own peace, your own direction. But over time, this weight becomes the foundation of real autonomy. You can finally choose your path, not because you're running from discomfort, but because you know what matters to you. Not everyone will understand this transformation. Some will accuse you of being cold, distant, or selfish. Others will quietly disappear, unable to adapt to the new boundaries you've set. Let them go. The people who remain will be those who respect you for who you are, not for what you provide. The losses sting, but they make space for relationships built on mutual respect, not obligation. You stop performing and start living. The truth is, the loneliness that comes with individuation is not a flaw. It's a necessary step. Jung warned that this journey would be marked by isolation, but he also called it sacred. In this space, you gain authenticity, clarity, and a focus that can't be shaken by others' expectations. Freedom isn't about comfort. It's about standing in your own truth, even when it's hard. And in that space, you realize the real opportunity isn't just in being free, but in choosing what you do with that freedom next. Because as you gain this new strength, another challenge waits. The risk isn't just loneliness, it's the temptation to become so self-reliant, so protected, that you lose your capacity to connect at all. There's a stage in this process where something unexpected shows up. Not weakness, not fear, but a new kind of challenge from within. Jung described the trickster as the archetype of chaos and disruption that prevents us from becoming rigid in our own power. The trickster isn't your enemy. It's not there to destroy what you've built, but to keep you from becoming a prisoner of your own self-mastery. After all the work you've done to integrate your shadow and claim your freedom, the real risk isn't falling back into old habits. It's convincing yourself you've outgrown the need for connection, support, or vulnerability. The trickster's role is to make sure you don't harden into someone who confuses self-mastery with emotional isolation. Picture someone who's spent years learning to stand on their own. They've stopped apologizing for their needs, they set boundaries, and they no longer bend to every demand. On the surface, it looks like the ultimate evolution. But then life throws something real at them. A loss, a setback, a moment of doubt. Instead of reaching out, they double down on their independence. They convince themselves that needing anyone is weakness, that asking for support would undo all their progress. The result? Their strength becomes a wall. They're protected, but they're also alone. Relationships thin out. Intimacy fades. The very power that set them free now keeps them at a distance from the world. This is the trickster's work. It's the internal force that disrupts your sense of having arrived. It shows up as restlessness, impulsiveness, or even self-sabotage, not to ruin you, but to break the illusion that you're finished growing. The trickster's chaos isn't random. It's there to challenge the rigidity of your new identity, to remind you that the pursuit of invulnerability is just another trap. It asks you, are you adapting, or are you just hiding behind new defenses? Are your boundaries serving you, or are they keeping you from real connection? Jung's insight is that the trickster is not a flaw in your character. It's a necessary balancing force. When you've integrated your shadow and gained what might feel like cold power, the temptation is to believe you're untouchable. But the trickster archetype keeps you honest. It makes sure you don't start mistaking emotional distance for wisdom or solitude for superiority. It disrupts the comfort of self-reliance, pushing you to stay open to the unpredictability of life and the needs of others. Without this disruption, power calcifies. You become someone who can't be reached, who can't be moved, who can't adapt. That's not strength, that's stagnation. This is where Jung's transcendent function comes in, holding strength and vulnerability together without collapsing into either. The transcendent function is not about choosing one side or the other. It's about being able to say, I can be strong and still need help. I can set boundaries and still be compassionate. I can be alone and still long for connection. This is psychological maturity, the ability to hold opposites, to stay flexible, to recognize that growth isn't a straight line. The trickster makes sure you don't settle into a single identity, no matter how powerful it feels. Think about a moment when you've set a hard boundary, and then someone you care about crosses it, not out of disrespect, but out of genuine need. The old you might have caved. The new you might hold firm, no matter what. But the trickster asks a different question. Can you respond with both strength and empathy? Can you adapt without abandoning yourself? The transcendent function lets you navigate these gray areas. It's the difference between being impenetrable and being resilient. You'll see the trickster's influence most clearly when you're tempted to close off after being hurt, or when you're drawn to isolation because it feels safer than risking disappointment. The trickster disrupts the comfort of certainty, forcing you to see where your power is turning into armor. It's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. If you ignore this force, you risk becoming someone who confuses being unbreakable with being alive. The cost is high: relationships that never deepen, opportunities for growth that slip away, a life that feels protected but ultimately empty. The trickster's lesson is clear. Real power isn't about never being touched, never being moved, never being in need. It's about staying open to life's unpredictability, about being able to bend without breaking. The transcendent function gives you the flexibility to meet life as it is, to connect, to adapt, to let others in when it matters. The goal isn't to become untouchable, but to become whole. If you've done the work to reclaim your energy, set boundaries, and integrate your shadow, don't let the process stop there. The trickster is a reminder that the journey isn't about becoming perfect or invulnerable. It's about staying human, staying connected, and never letting your strength turn into a cage. Hold your power lightly, stay flexible, and let the unexpected in. That's the only way to keep growing.